What's up, guys? Swift here. Waking up after a Bears win is always great. Preseason wins aren't nearly as fun, but it's still awesome to have football back. I rewatched last night's game about 6 to 7 times on the condensed version and wanted to give my takeaways of a few players after watching them more closely and talk about a couple of things from last night's game. Who stood out, who let me down, and I have to ask if the Nate Davis slander has gone too far. Let's get right into it. Colin Johnson was the player of the game. He stood out and made big time plays all night long, and he just missed making a couple more. I have been fooled by big time preseason performances from Bears receivers in the past, so I'm not going to overhype Colin Johnson. But if he can continue to play this way throughout camp, he should make the roster. I think he's easily jumped ahead of Dante Pettis and is probably our wide receiver 6 or 7 right now, battling with DeAndre Carter. Meanwhile, Velus Jones Jr.'s spot on the roster seems pretty safe after the Bears chose to rest him last night. I think people forget how good Velus has been as a kick returner, and the Bears might think he's a potential X factor with the new kickoff rules. So, with our big three receivers plus Tyler Scott and Velus Jones, that's 5 wide receiver spots already locked up. The only spot left is number 6, which should go to our starting punt returner, and DeAndre Carter is the favorite to win that job. That means that Colin Johnson's chances of making the roster are slim unless the Bears choose to keep 7 receivers. If he continues playing like he did last night, he could make that decision easy. Meanwhile, one of the guys I was really impressed with was Jatiri Carter. He served up multiple pancakes and he won almost every rep of the night. He looked good in space on screens, he held his own in pass protection, and he dominated in the run game. Carter really stood out in the second quarter with Brett Rippon controlling the offense. Carter was in at left guard with Bill Murray in at right guard. During this time, to me, it was clear that Carter looked better than Bill Murray. While Bill Murray was very athletic and looked like he had some potential, in live game action, he looked lost on multiple plays and he didn't nearly make the impact that Jatiri Carter had. On top of that, Carter would get reps at left tackle later in the game as well. It's puzzling to me why he seems to be in the doghouse with the coaching staff. I really like what I saw from Jatiri Carter. Matt Pryor looked okay at right tackle, but he seems to be behind Jake Curran in the battle spot at tackle. Meanwhile, Curran didn't have a bad night. He played mostly right tackle, and he held his own. I might have been overlooking him a little bit. He did play with Waldron in Seattle and has 9 starts over 3 seasons, all at right tackle. And then Jerome Carvin was surprisingly not bad at center. He was up and down and didn't dominate, but he worked center with the first 2 units and then slid over to left guard when Doug Kramer came in. Speaking of Doug Kramer, he only played in 2 drives late in the third quarter, including 1 touchdown drive where he looked great. Unfortunately, the game got suspended right after Kramer took over, so we missed the chance to see him get extended reps. Kramer did look bigger and more powerful than what I've seen the first 2 years. He had a pancake in one of his first reps of the day and actually looked better than I expected. Have to keep my eye on Doug Kramer going forward. But overall, this is what the offensive line and D-line rotation looked like last night. The starters were Larry Borum at left tackle with Jatiri Carter at left guard. Jerome Carvin was the center, Matt Pryor at right guard, and Jake Curran at right tackle. The second unit was Aviante Collins, Carter, Carvin, and then Bill Murray and Matt Pryor slid over to right tackle. But then we had another unit enter the game before it was suspended, and that featured Jatiri Carter at left tackle. Jerome Carvin would slide over from center to left guard. Doug Kramer was at center, Bill Murray at right guard, and then Jake Curran back in the game at right tackle again. On defensive line, the starters were Khalid Kareem and Dominique Robinson at defensive end, with Byron Coward and Zach Pickens inside. The second unit that rotated in was Daniel Hardy and D-Rob in the D-line, and Michael Dwumfor and Byron Coward inside. But they also had a pass rush unit that would come out on third downs and in obvious pass rush situations. That had Khalid Kareem and Austin Booker at defensive end, with Keith Randolph Jr. and Michael Dwumfor on the inside. I liked seeing Keith Randolph Jr. in there with the pass rush unit. But I did want to talk about Byron Coward. He really impressed me last night. He was a fifth-round pick by the Patriots in 2019, and he started 14 games in 2020. He's a 28-year-old journeyman defensive tackle who really had a good game last night. He got a strip sack in the third quarter. Austin Booker would make a great play and get to the quarterback to bring him down, but it was Cowart stripping the ball out right before Booker got to the QB. He also was just kind of flying off the line of scrimmage and showcased his ability to shed blocks and make plays in the run game. Byron Cowart looked really good last night, even noticed him getting held a couple of times. But I also wanted to talk about Zach Pickens, who I was pretty hard on in my post-game breakdown last night. He didn't have an impact game, but Pickens was not awful. He might have lost a couple of reps, but he made a couple of plays in the run game, showcasing his ability to shed blocks, and he had a couple of decent pass rush reps as well. I'm really high on Zach Pickens, and I love his potential. I did expect a little bit more, but it wasn't as bad of a showing as I initially thought from our young second-year defensive tackle. The guy I was most disappointed with after rewatching the condensed game was Dominique Robinson, a guy in a make-or-break year who got a lot of reps. D-Rob was mostly invisible. D-Rob really needs to step up if he wants to stick around on this team. But just like with Doug Kramer on offense, there were two guys I really wanted to see on the defensive line, and they barely got any reps. Both Jamry Cromah and Keith Randolph would come into the game late in the third quarter and force a 3-and-out from the Texans. That was on the drive when Dante Pettis would muff the punt and give the ball right back. That was the first time I saw Jamry Cromah in the game. Keith Randolph Jr. was getting some reps with the pass rush unit earlier, but this was his first time coming in for an entire drive. A guy who did get a good amount of reps, though, was Austin Booker. He showcased his burst off the line of scrimmage and his insane athleticism, length, and power. But he also looked raw and like a guy who needs to continue developing. We know Matt Eberflus values the ability to set the edge as a defensive end, and while Booker did showcase surprising power, he doesn't look ready as an every down defender. The positives, though, were his relentless motor. He never gave up on a play and he was always hustling, even knocking the Texans tackle to the ground twice. Booker also drew a couple of double teams and showcased real power in his bull rush, something that was a bit unexpected. Booker should have had a sack, but he was robbed by his own teammate. Booker went speed to power and beat the tackle inside to get to Case Keenum, but Byron Cowart would strip the ball out right before Booker brought the quarterback down. Overall, it was a solid performance from Booker, but he clearly needs to continue working on his technique. As you can tell, he's a bit unrefined. You can clearly see the tool set and the upside he brings to the table, but he's still raw when it comes to technique and polish. His plan this year is to keep getting better. He's not ready to push for a starting job yet, but he does seem like he could be a factor as a situational pass rusher early on. To me, he's just still raw and kind of like a bull in a china shop style of rush plan, but he is capable of causing havoc in the backfield, especially on obvious passing down. Overall, though, I think it's important to note that I expected a sloppy performance from this team. First off, the field conditions were not great, and on top of that, it was raining most of the night. Pair that with the fact that players haven't done any live tackling in camp yet, and they've only had 2 padded practices total, and I expected this game to be sloppy. Anyone who was expecting perfect football just had unrealistic expectations. Also, I'm not going to overhype Brett Rippon's performance yet. Yes, he played great against mostly backups and dudes who won't even make the NFL. But Tyson Bagent is still QB2 if you ask me. The guy was an undrafted rookie out of Division II who proved last year with a less talented roster that he's capable of running this offense and winning football games. You will probably hear most of the media calling for a QB competition here, but I just don't see it yet. And then my final point, the media is spinning a narrative with Nate Davis, giving him slack for not dressing last night when none of the other starters dressed either. Caleb Williams and a couple of the guys dressed to get some warm-ups in, but they were in street clothes once the game started. The only reason they even dressed was to let Caleb Williams get used to it, and he would come on the field and take practice taking some snaps from both Coleman Shelton and Ryan Bates. But Nate Davis was there. He was in street clothes alongside Tevin Jenkins and Darnell Wright and some other guys. There's no big deal there. I still want to see Nate Davis in practice, but anyone making a big deal about him not dressing last night is just trying to stir stuff up. As far as Caleb Williams and the starters go, I expect we see them next week. Saturday, August 10th, an afternoon game, noon Central, 1 Eastern. We should get to see Caleb Williams for the very first time. I cannot wait. Thanks to everyone who watches. Please remember to hit that like button for me. Stay tuned. And until next time, bear down.